And there's so many parallels to life of how to, you mentioned it before with kids. I think there's so many parallels to that of how we teach kids to go through that process on their own and be open in that way. Even before when you were speaking about, politics is always in the room. I think I have an 8-year-old son. I think of that often. There's a lot of people who take the stance of whether it be racism, sexuality, whatever it is, like don't talk to kids about that. And don't get me wrong, you should talk age appropriately. But
Right.
if you're that naive to think because you're not talking to your kid about it, that it's not there, it's not around with their friends, whatever, they're hearing it on TV, even something as simple, I find myself often thinking this, and it's better today, but my son will be watching TV and it's, you start to notice like there's not many black people in that show. Now,
Right.
is he learning explicitly about racism? No, but he's watching these shows where it's just common to not see black people and they're never in a position of authority or whatever it might be. And to think that that's not a thing that's influencing his mind and how he views the world and his perspective, I think, and some people would say, oh, you're going too far in that direction. I don't know, maybe, but to me, it's all back to the word. It's very logical. That all seems very real
Right.
to me.
And it's not, I think some people who might say that is because either A, they really believe that Black people shouldn't be in those shows, they just don't want to say it, or because they're naive and want to sort of put their head in the sand and be like, "Oh, it doesn't mean anything,
Hmm.
everything's value, there's no value in this," and so
Hmm.
forth. I'm glad you brought up kids. I feel like kids and parenting is the last frontier about power. Um, I feel like kids, like, we need to have a kids movement the way we had a women's movement. But it's difficult because kids can't really advocate for themselves. But the way that we talk to kids, the way we talk about kids, the way we parent kids is still very much entrenched into this model of power over.
Sure.
And even the way we're like, well, my kid can't do that to me. It's so personal and
Yeah.
so rooted in who has power over whom. That I don't think, to go back to some origin story, I don't think it's not a mystery why most of us don't know how to negotiate power when we don't do that in our own homes. As a child, we don't learn how to negotiate. We don't learn how to, have power dynamics with someone that has a responsibility over us but gives us the agency of choice.
Mm.
So we don't do that for a lot of years of our lives. And yet when we grow up, we're told, well, go have a healthy relationship and learn how to negotiate power.
Good
Good
luck.
luck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I can think of it and I like to think, this journey I've been on doing the podcast, different things. I'd like to think I'm getting better, but I'm not naive enough to think I have it figured out by any means because I can still think of instances where I try and talk to my son about it when it comes up. So there'll be times where I need to exert power over him and I want him to do something. Maybe he did something that was selfish, right? He wasn't being thoughtful in that
Mhm.
moment. And my instinct, very much like you're saying, is to just squash it and like
Right.
overbearing, bring a hammer because and at the root of it is I don't want you to be selfish. I want you to be considerate of other people. And I have to remind myself constantly to be like, it's so much better if I just tell him that. Like, hey, whatever the thing is, maybe you're gonna
Yeah.
get punished, maybe you're gonna get a timeout, maybe you can't go out with your friends later, whatever. But let me explain why. It's not just a because I said so, power dynamic, drop the hammer. It's I want you to understand that negotiation you said, but you're right. There isn't. I still feel it. There's an insecurity in me that questions that sometimes. It's like, am I letting him take advantage of me? Am I being a weak
See?
parent? Am I weak as
Right.
a man, as a person?
Right.
And if you
Exactly.
don't, this is all connected in what we're saying because if I'm not willing to face, because maybe I am insecure as a man, maybe I do think I'm too weak.
Right.
And why is that, right? If I'm not willing to follow that thread and understand that, then when that situation arises, I'm going to take the easiest path and just exert my power and be okay with it. It forces me to face those things that many of us, myself included at times, don't want to face. So all of this is so interconnected in how you're saying it.
Yeah, and it's a good example of, yeah, and of course you're going to feel insecure. We all feel insecure sometimes, and that's okay. And I think another layer to this, again, reminding us that the personal is always political, parenting has become very difficult. I mean, I think COVID made it even worse. The truth is, most of us work an insane amount of hours. We don't spend enough time with our kids. And when you have only 2 hours, that's not to excuse parents, but
Sure.
it's an understanding, right? Of, okay, I could do all this, or I could just tell you, look, do this and don't ask any questions. So I think that it's both individual of how we show up, how we make those questions, how do we own up to our own insecurities, and societal. I am fascinated by our society's sort of investment, pro-choice, pro-life, this and that, and fetuses.
Mm.
And yet once we have a child, there's very little support.
Mm.
there's very little monetary support. Like parents, good luck, you're on your own, you have the child, which I again, we go back to, how do we live out our values?
And it starts with understanding. You have to
Right.
understand what and be honest about what we actually value, which I think is something you're bringing up constantly in this. We often aspire or say we value something, but it's very different. Let
And
me
it's
ask you.
easier it's nice, it's sort of sexy to be like, I'm all for this and I'm all for that. And what I often ask people is, and how do you live out those values?